In the early hours of April 1922, something happened at the remote Bavarian farmhouse known as Hinterkaifeck that would shake Germany to its core. As you'll soon discover, this tragic event not only involved the deaths of 6 people, but also left behind one of the biggest mysteries in criminal history. But first, if you could please take a second to show your support, that would be amazing. Now, let's meet the victims. First, there was 60-year-old Andreas Gruber. After losing his father when he was just 4 years old, Andreas was raised alongside his brother on the family farm in the small village of Nuremberg. At some point, Andreas married a woman named Creepiest, and the couple wound up raising 5 children together, all of whom eventually moved out except for their eldest daughter, Viktoria. By 1922, she was a 35-year-old widow who lived with her 2 young children, 7-year-old Josefina, or Kazilia, and 2-year-old Josef, alongside her father and stepmother. Then we have Kazilia, the wife of Andreas. She was a 40-year-old who struggled with health problems throughout her life and spent much of her time completing household chores. Next, there was Viktoria, who had an unusual upbringing. When she was still very young, her mother, Margaret, passed away. But her father remarried, which upset Viktoria so much that she began having seizures. These events caused the young girl to develop a severe hatred towards men. She eventually gave up on love altogether and focused on taking care of her father and younger siblings. And finally, we have 21-year-old Maria Baumgartner, the Gruber's new maid, who came highly recommended by her previous employer. Despite her inexperience as a maid, Maria was described as being smart, beautiful, and kind. Now that we've met the residents of Hinterkaifeck, let's talk about what happened there in March 1922. The trouble started in late March, when the family noticed some peculiar things happening around the house. First, they saw a series of footprints in the snow that led up to the front door, but didn't lead away. Whoever had made them seemed to have walked straight into the house and disappeared. To make matters worse, the Grub's dog began acting strangely, barking and whining in the direction of the barn for no apparent reason. On March 29th, the family was eating dinner when they heard loud footsteps in the attic. Assuming it was just a mouse, Andreas grabbed a broom and went to investigate, but he couldn't find anything. He returned to his meal, and everyone tried to forget about the noise. But it happened again on the following night, and the sound was even louder. Everyone was now convinced that there was someone or something in the attic. So Andreas went back up there to check, but once again he came back downstairs empty-handed. Meanwhile, Cecilia decided that enough was enough, and she called the local police to inform them of their situation. The police arrived and searched the property but failed to find anything. And with nothing else to go on, they simply told the family to lock their doors and go to sleep. On March 30th, another strange thing happened. The Grubers received a copy of the Murgauer Zeitung, a regional newspaper which was delivered to their home even though no one had subscribed to it. It contained articles about local events and a story about a mysterious house on Galgenberg Hill that had been sold to an unknown buyer. If you ask me, it sounds almost too bizarre to be true, but it really happened. By this point, the family was desperate to find out what was going on. So Viktoria suggested that they should all pray to Saint Joseph, who was known for driving out evil spirits. The next morning, however, their prayers weren't answered. When they went out to feed their livestock, they discovered that someone had already done it for them. To top it all off, the smell of fresh bread filled the air, although no one had baked any. The family was terrified. Maria, the maid, began crying and asked for permission to go home. But Andreas told her that she was not allowed to leave until someone figured out what was going on at the house. On the evening of April 4th, the family was gathered in the kitchen when they heard the telltale sound of footsteps in the attic again. A few minutes later, the power went out. They lit some candles and carried on as normal, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. After finishing their meal, they all went to bed, and that's when things got really weird. Viktoria woke up in the middle of the night and went to use the bathroom. On her way back to bed, she stopped in the hallway and listened intently. She heard what sounded like 2 people whispering directly outside their bedroom wall. Fearing for her life, Viktoria ran and hid under her bed. When the coast was clear, she quietly left the room and joined her sister in bed. They both stayed silent until sunrise, when they got out of bed to discover that the rest of the family was missing. Andreas and Kazilia were nowhere to be found. The back door was wide open and the beds had been neatly made, so whoever had taken them had obviously planned ahead. Viktoria immediately called the police, who arrived within the hour. Their investigation revealed that Andreas and Cecilia had been bludgeoned to death in their sleep. Unfortunately, their bodies weren't recovered until 4 days later because the killer had barricaded the bedroom door so well that even the police had difficulty getting in. But wait, it gets worse. As the police searched the house, they found more disturbing signs of foul play. They found clumps of Cecilia's hair torn out by force, as well as a mattock covered in blood and human tissue in the cellar. The weapon had been used to murder all 6 people in the house, including Maria, who was beaten in her bed, and little Joseph, who was just 2 years old. The killer had even gone after baby Josefina, striking her several times on the head, but she managed to survive the attack and hid under her bed. To make matters worse, the killer had barricaded the door to the children's bedroom, but forgot to lock it properly. After hearing what happened to her family, the quick-witted girl called out for help, and the police were able to get her out safely. After hearing this horrific news, Josefina was taken to live with relatives, where she remained until her death in 1934. Unfortunately, the case went cold after this, with no one being brought to justice. So what happened at Hinterkaifeck? Who could have done such a thing and why? And how did the killer manage to evade the police? Well, there are a number of theories out there. Some believe that it was a random act of violence committed by a drifter who was passing through the area. However, there's no evidence to support this claim, and it doesn't explain why the killer stayed in the house afterward. Others believe that the killer was someone close to the family. Perhaps someone knew about the inheritance and wanted to collect it. But this doesn't make sense either because nothing was taken. What about the footprints in the snow? Surely the police must have found some answers there, right? Well, actually, they did. After dusting for fingerprints in the snow, they discovered 3 footprints leading up to the house. 2 were male and 1 was female. They then traced those footprints back to a farmhouse nearby and arrested the 2 men who lived there. Upon questioning, however, it became obvious that neither of them had anything to do with the murders. They were released and the investigation continued without any new leads. Some people even blamed the devil himself, pointing to the fact that Viktoria had been seen praying for help against the devil just days before the killings. But I don't know about you guys. That just sounds like a coincidence to me. And here's another strange detail. When the police searched the house, they found that the killer had left behind plenty of clues, but none of them made much sense. Why would they leave behind a bloody mattock, clumps of the victim's hair, and footprints in the snow? It seems as though they wanted to be caught. And then there's the mystery of the smoke rising from the chimney after the murders. How could someone have stayed in the house knowing that a crime scene investigation was underway? Did they really think the police wouldn't find the bodies? Sadly, the case remains unsolved to this day. But what do you think? Who killed the grubs and why? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, please don't forget to show your support. Thank you. All right, guys, that's all for now. Until next time.